what are examiners looking for? So it's a bit of a broader one, and it's coming from the process of, well, my many years of working with it. Just to try and give you an idea of, what actually on the page gets you marks, right? Okay, helps you along. Because I've said before, there's a lot of misinformation out there. These people who say, oh, you do this and you'll get these marks. There is no easy way past. There's no shortcut to getting there. But what we do have is we do have things where I can highlight to you what essentially kind of we talk about at meetings, what we are out there looking for. Okay, so if I start here with the idea of just a couple of key points of almost what they start with us every year at an examiner's marking meeting talking about. Okay, they point out to us because they want us to make it clear to our examiners that this qualification is rooted in what they call reader response critical theory, the relationship between the reader and the writer. In other words, what they're saying is that the entire point, what they're trying to do, they're trying to see you at a high skill level examine that relationship. Okay, examine how a literary work speaks to the person reading it. Now that opens something up very clearly for you. How the person is spoken to, the person reading spoken to. Who's the person reading? It's you. So it's not asking for set answers. It's not asking for clever things that people can say. It's saying, I want you to show your skills, use your skills to show me how has this text affected you. Okay, as a reader. So what the writer has done, the impact on the reader. That's what it's comes down to. What has the writer done? What is the impact on you as the reader? Now, it's very important to note this, and I'll give you an example of this in a second. I have mentioned similar before, but questions, they make quite clear, are an invitation to you, not a constraint. In other words, they do not give you a question and say, right, if you don't cover this, if you don't go exactly down the line we want, you're going to lose marks. No, it's not saying you write about whatever you want to, but it's an invitation for you to go where you want. That's why, for example, the power and conflict ones, they love to have ones that say ideas about power. Write about ideas about power. In other words, what do you find interesting? It's power, because it's power and conflict. What are you interested in power? What can you see here? What can you see that goes with this poem here? And that means you have that space to really take it where you feel is interesting. Now, for example, again, a few years ago, they used, I can't remember how long ago, they used in Macbeth a question about Macbeth as a male character who changes the play. Now, you could get full marks just writing about how he changes. Or you could address the male part. It's totally down to you. The proportion you take of those different ideas is down to what you want. Right? Yeah, I think it probably helps you to take the male part out of that because it allows you to talk about masculinity and ideas, which are bigger ideas, and I should talk about. But it's an open invitation. That's what you need to be aware of. Need to remember that. When you see that question, don't sit there and think, oh, that's a tough question. It's not. It's where can I take this? What does this throw up in me? And the thing that I'm sure you've all been made aware of is that the principle underlying everything is positive marking. We are told repeatedly, mark what is there, not what is not there. Okay? We mark what you've done, not what you've not said, what you've left out. Okay? And if you write a load of rubbish, we just tactically ignore it and look for the stuff that isn't. I've said before, you could literally have a brilliant fantastic Christmas Carol, 30 out of 30 essay. And then there's a paragraph in the middle of it which talks about how Scrooge, it would still get 30 out of 30 because we just ignore that passage, right? And think that's a bit weird. Okay. So think about those three things. That is something that should open up this qualification for you, because it basically comes down to a couple of key things. One, do you know the text? That's really, really the central thing of it. When, I did that thing earlier on in the year about how to revise. Again, basically, my point was read the texts. Just know the text. The better you know them, the better in control of them you are, the better you'll be. Because then you can apply these questions, your skills, your knowledge of the play, your knowledge of the book to that question when it comes up. Okay. So our general marking principles, when we come up, you'll probably be aware of this idea of the ladder. The ladder that you climb up is often mentioned. The sense that everybody starts at the bottom of this ladder. Each rung is like another level, okay? And when you show it, you climb up and you climb up and you climb up. And it's a one-way ladder. You can't climb back down again. It's a helpful analogy, that, but it's not a perfect analogy. It can be misleading in some ways. And we have to push this onto particularly new examiners. You don't start at the bottom necessarily, right? We quite often make a judgment very early on. We're going to start at a high level. Countless times we have examples where what we do when we go for the challenge, they say, why would you start annotating anything below a level 5? Which is obviously somebody who is going to be producing the highest grades. What's the point in going up through? No point at all. I'm in at a higher level. Now, why is that important? It's because it tells you how important the quality of your thesis is. If we read your thesis and we think this is going to go somewhere, right? Then we are looking for those high grades straight away. We're looking for those high levels early on. So have a quality thesis, a well thought out, a well put together thesis, and you are again essentially giving us an opportunity to start rewarding you early on at a high standard. I mean, technically you can't really say this, but there have certainly been instances when you've read a line or two at the beginning and thought there'll be 4 marks. Yeah, because you can tell so early on from people's intelligence. So starting well like that works. So let's think about that idea of the thesis then. How are we going to make that good then? We talked about this a number of times in the sessions that I've done, the importance of an effective thesis. And so much of what I do here when I talk through the individual texts and ideas going behind it is about shaping interpretations, the big ideas. And it goes back to that critical reader theory, right? That your thesis starts from the perspective of this is a construct, this piece. It's a construct. It's not real. It has been written. It has been written with the intention of communicating with its readers, and you are the reader. And so your thesis starts with the idea, what overall, what is that bigger picture that I'm getting? What is that theory that I have about this idea, about this question I've got? If it's Macbeth is a character, a male character that changes, right? I don't want to just identify that Macbeth changes. I don't want to just identify that he's male and he changes. I don't want to say he starts like this and he ends like this. Too simple, right? Too straightforward. I want to get into it in an interesting way. I want to really start to think about this. I want to think that, okay, although we see a development, the Macbeth at the end of the play doesn't appear to be the same one as at the beginning of the play. Is he? He might not seem to be that way, but then again, he was brutal and violent and unpleasant at the beginning was the only thing that was in his way. Fear. I'm thinking about that. I go back to Macbeth's soliloquy, his first main soliloquy, that one, scene 7, where he's giving all the reasons not to do it, and then comes around and says the only reason I have is thoughts and ambition, right? And then talks himself out of it. Now, many people, for example, use that to show Macbeth's humanity, because it basically seems to be him going, well, I can't kill Duncan, he's a good king. I shouldn't kill him because of that. People, it shouldn't kill off a good king. I'm related to him, so I shouldn't be doing that. But I think if you look at that soliloquy closely, I think you see that actually what he's saying is not, I shouldn't kill Duncan because he's a good king. It's, I shouldn't kill Duncan because people think he's a good king, they'll be upset and that won't work for me. And I think if you look at all that, you see that Macbeth is essentially intensely selfish. Every single reason he gives is about why it's a problem for him. And so that would be part of my argument, a more theoretical argument going through, that maybe he always was like he is at the end. It just, as he got more power, it freed him. That's what I'm thinking about in terms of shaping a thesis that allows you to go somewhere interesting with it. So always come from the angle that this is written by a writer for a purpose. That's where I'd always come from. Never come from the idea of that character as somebody real. Always come at the purpose. You're writing about Mr. Burling, right? Don't come from the idea of Mr. Burling is a character who changes in this way, or who doesn't change and who doesn't want to do all this. No, think. He's a created character by Priestley for a purpose. Why make him that way? Why make him a working class man turned good, apparent working class? Why? What's the role he has in there? That begins to take you in at a stronger level. That allows you to set up a controlled and conceptual interpretation that you then want to stick to, will drive your answer throughout. So if you come at it from the right angle for a purpose, this is something we've been working out all the way through. Controlled and conceptual. Why is this person this way? Why has Dickens included poverty in every single section of that? Why at every moment does he come back to poverty? And set yourself up so that you can be exploratory. That is another key word that we like to see people explore. And I mentioned this when I was talking about writing a level 6 answer. Okay? The use of connectives, causal connectives. However, on the other hand, but that allow you to turn it into discussion. Okay? Set yourselves up so that you can do that. Not so you don't know the answer and you're looking for it as you're going, but just so that you can explore the text there. Overall, I am sure most of you, because I think most of the teachers here follow this idea that I come up with a while ago of that the thesis essentially needs to be 2 parts. Something but something. Okay? That you come up with your clear answer first of all, then you go, but if I think a bit deeper, it goes into that. The reason being that second part of it, when you're thinking, it's making you go a little bit deeper. It's a little bit more theoretical. It's a little bit more conceptual. It's a little bit harder to talk about. And what that means is, whatever you've not managed to do in the first half of your essay, you've got a chance to do in the second because you're dealing with something deeper, much harder. Okay? In other words, work on your butt. You'll remember that, right? Work on your butt. That is the thing that you can prepare, you can think about in advance. You're thinking about power in the emigre, okay? You're thinking about the way power's used. You think about that overall idea of what you think's going on, and then you go, but always be ready to think that a little bit deeper. In fact, there's another version of this that I always do when, and I think I mentioned it probably when we were talking about revision, the and but so. Come up with an idea and then keep it going. Think, and so this is true, and then this is true, but where would I take that otherwise? So what does that mean in the end? Takes it through. So get that thesis going, get that thesis focused. We will really, really be interested. You will not get any marks for that thesis on its own, but it gives us a sense of where we're going with you. Now, in the main body of the essay, again, what are we looking for? What are we looking to see? Well, first of all, and I'll come to the fact that it's all about the AOs in a minute, but when you're using references, we're very interested in the choice and use of references. Now, that's not to say that you can't do extremely well with the same references that everybody else uses. It's not saying you need to have niche references. What it's saying is that what you need to have is the ability to choose different references, appropriate ones. It means that when Mr. Berlin comes up, you don't walk in there thinking, Titanic, right? As everybody else does. Not even a very good quote. Sorry, got me off on one line. Not even the best quote in that second. But I hate it, bloody Titanic. Right. But it doesn't really say much about it. But people use it because they've sat there and they've learned it and they remember it. What we want is people who are thinking carefully about why they've chosen. If that Titanic quote is absolutely the perfect one for demonstrating what you're saying, great, wonderful. You're doing something interesting with it. But if you're like so many people taking from whichever online thing it is, the idea that he talks about the thing that Titanic, which shows he's an idiot, and at the same time, the Titanic was a place where rich people were on the top and poor people were down the bottom, and the rich got off and saved. So it's like showing that the richer are benefiting over everybody else. But the Titanic sank, and that's like his arrogance. In the end, he's going to sink. We know that comes from somewhere else. We know, we see it loads and loads of times. It's not your original thought. It's a good point if it's related to what you're talking about, if it's really taking your idea forward. But we want you to be able to choose and use references. Right? Okay? And I don't play golf is never the right reference. When you're then going to AO2, what we then do want you to do at a high level, just going to go in there, is really looking at the effects of writers' choices. And choices is broad. When we're looking at writers' methods, we're looking at characterization, for example. Right? It doesn't have to be choice of a word. Characterization. Remember I said this about the other week about an inspector calls, how silly it is to suggest one particular word has a massive effect in the inspector calls, because it doesn't. It's just said and it goes. What's much more interesting is to think about how character is developed, how he tries to create a character, to think about how he uses something dramatic. That's what we're talking about as a play before going into there, and linking it closely to meanings. So you're seeing closely the effect of it and closely linking it to meanings. It is not about language analysis. It is not about picking out the word such and such means that suggest this, right? Occasionally you do talk about individual words, that's fine, but it's not language. It's really about you understanding what the writer is trying to do and drawing that out. That's what we want to see. And the thing that will really, really impress us is if it is a part of a discussion of a meaning. fits into that overall discussion, that thesis that you were talking about. You're taking that idea further forward. Just like I was doing just then and explaining to you how that Macbeth me starts to show that there are different aspects to him that some people seem to think at the beginning. I wasn't just picking out individual bits of there and showing, look, I can analyze. It was all about me proving one particular thing I'm saying. Now, when you are dealing with Macbeth, A Christmas Carol and Power and Conflict, make sure the extract is thoroughly used for AO2. That's the other thing that we want to do. It's not exclusively this, but the extract questions, generally we think, the structure of it is, if you are given something printed on the page, well, no longer do you need to remember it. It's there. And we don't expect you to you're not going to get any marks for understanding it. We expect you to understand it. Even if it's Macbeth, we expect you've studied Macbeth. You've had every opportunity to understand it totally. We're looking for, we're interested in, is then for you to really look at that closely for how the writer is doing that. So in the Macbeth answer, when you've got the extract, really look closely at what is Shakespeare doing here. Not what's Macbeth saying, not what's Lady Macbeth saying, what is Shakespeare doing here to get across what's happening. Look closely at how he's constructing that. You're unlikely to use AO2 that much when you're talking about the text as a whole, because you're unlikely to have that many references that precise. So in the rest of the text, we're generally thinking you're more likely to just make references and discuss them. But the AO2 is what we want to see in Macbeth, Christmas Carol, in the extracts, in the printed poem on Power and Conflict. We really want to see you engage with how the text is put together. And of course, the other thing we're looking for is all of the AOs being done. Remember, as we said the other week, AO3 is not about bringing in loads of exterior context. It's about addressing the idea that's in the question. So that's what we're looking for. As I say, control of the text allows you to do this, especially this one, your choice and use of references. Right? I mentioned Mr. Burling as an example. There are so many Mr. Burling example quotations that are really, really effective. Okay. I still don't remember seeing anybody yet use what I think is one of the most revelatory things in it. When Sheila comes back in after running out and says, I told my father what happened. He didn't seem to think it amounted to much. I mean, that's literally, so Mr. Burling heard what we hear about her getting this girl sacked because she'd like vaguely smiled at her and she made her feel bad. And he's gone, that doesn't mean much, does it? Oh, that's horrific. Again, think about these different moments that you can get when you're reading through it. Spot things, go, hang on. Why is he saying? He's saying that. Why is he into other Mr. Burling one? Jumps out at me is, of course, the women of the town moment. Yeah? Remember, Mrs. Burling goes, women of the town? You know, can't believe that they exist in Burling and in Brumley. And Burling just basically goes, yes, but no. So hang on. First of all, he's not shocked in the slightest. He knows. Why does he know? Is it just because he's a worldly man? Because he was the... Anyway, he knows that Palace Bar is full of people. Just small things. If you know your play, you've got plenty to discuss and talk about. Okay. And finally, what are we looking for when we get to the conclusion? Now, the conclusion at your level particularly is so important. Very disappointed not having it at your level. Very disappointed. Okay? And it could well affect the AO1 task, because you're not really bringing it around to the end. And also, just to say this, I have lost count of the number of times, couldn't tell you how often, that we give marks in the conclusion. Last summer, one of the ones that we looked at together was given 3 extra marks in the conclusion alone. That is an entire grade. because of the conclusion. Okay? It's not saying it hadn't earned them before, it's just saying it brought it together at the end and that confirmed that mark. So the two things you've really got to address with the conclusion. Remember, in AO1 text at this high level, we want to see a critical response to the text. So we want to see you at the end in the conclusion giving your opinion. Not I think this, written like that, but really coming to a conclusion of an idea of, so what really is the writer trying to do here? What is the impact of this? We want to see a clear overview of the text in terms of the writer's purpose, what they're trying to do, and any contextual things that are there as well, how that affects it overall. They're the two key things. Now, your teachers may have done this with you. Again, this is another one that I came up with a few years back that I know some of them use. If you really struggle with conclusions, I often think of it in terms of a three-question approach. What are you basically saying when it comes to the end? Okay? So, you argue this all right. Basically, what you're saying. If all this is true, what you're saying. So what? Why does that matter? So what? The significance of that. Which allows you to finish off by saying, you think the writer's message. It's a lovely finish there. It allows us to come and give you marks, potentially, when you're going through it. Okay, let's come to that Burling one. Say you talk about him as a selfish character. That one that came up about him as being a character who cares about himself and his family. Again, a lovely one there where you've got that point of, well, obviously, he's the most selfish, he's ridiculously selfish, unbelievably. But his family, I don't think he cares about them at all. Right? Not really. There's a little bit. He gets a bit upset about Eric, doesn't he? Which is funny considering he gives him such a hard time. But he does. He gets a little bit upset about Eric. He calls him my boy. My boy gets up in this. But really, at the end, he doesn't seem to care. So if I come back to there, that's what I'm basically saying. I'm basically saying that this Burling is a character created because he's a capitalist. He's created by Priestley as being somebody who is unbelievably selfish, who has been almost conditioned to be that way. And that includes his family. So what? Well, that's what he's saying about what capitalism does to people. That's what the point is. That's what's coming into there. So his message at the end is that needs to change in the world is we need less of a reliance on money and profit because it corrupts and it corrupts. That's where I'll go. So it's a way of drawing in. You can see how that pulls it together at the end. So basically, overall, what I'm saying to you is, from a point of view of saying, not that there's anything special that we're looking at, but we do read quality very, very quickly. Okay? And if we see quality, we're looking to reward quality. That positive marking means we want to give those high marks. Another thing I haven't mentioned that is very, very important that said is they say, do not be scared to go into level 6. And they tell us when we're looking at new examiners or our examiners underneath us as team leaders, look at those examiners and make sure early on they're not scared of going into 6s. They make sure they're given standardized scripts that are level 6s so that we see them do so. Okay? So you will be rewarded if you go there. Okay.